It's time for another Sit and Talk FAQ. This is the show where I just take a question from my longer 1 hour Ask Me Anything Sit and Talk show, and I publish it for everybody to see because sometimes it's easier just to break them out. And if you want to see the entire show, there'll be a link in the video description below. So this one is from Rob Hobb. Hi Matt, have you read about the last financial report of Games Workshop? Also, what do you think about Tom Kirby, the CEO, stepping down? I see this as a big chance for Games Workshop to change their way of business, especially with the community handling. Greetings, Robert. So this is not necessarily something that you'd be interested in knowing because you definitely want to know my point of view, but a lot of people are curious about this whole situation. And so I just want to kind of chime in my 2 cents. So first off, what happened? If you're not aware, Games Workshop, being a public company, has to publish their financial reports for everybody to see. And they do one at a half year and at a full year. So at the end of every July, they have their financial report because their fiscal year is from July to July. I think the beginning of July to the beginning of July. And so in that financial report, the CEO, Tom Kirby in this case, has his preamble where he basically prefaces the whole financial report with his thoughts of how things are going. And this one is particularly interesting because at the very beginning of it, he says, we've had a good year. Now, if by good, and he even put it in quotations, you mean the numbers are good, then maybe you don't agree. And that statement right there is causing a bit of a commotion, let's just say, because you can't say you've had a good year when your revenues are down and your profits are down. Now, profits can be down and you can still say you had a good year because he made a lot of points of how they've been investing in certain things and spending on certain things, and so those things are not something that happens every year. And so if it's just a temporary thing, like, hey, we spent an extra £4 million on the website, or we spent an extra 10 million restructuring or whatever. And if that's just a one-time thing and it's meant to save you money in the long run, then yeah, that's a good thing. But the problem is the financial report shows that it's not just profits that are down 42%, I believe it is, but revenues are down too. Now, I'm not the type of person to be like, oh, the revenues went down, I guess it signals the end of Games Workshop. Because any company is going to have ups and downs, especially when they're well established. See, when you have basically, when you look at the life of a company, from beginning to possible death when it's sold to somebody else or goes, or whatever happens, typically at the beginning you have rapid growth. Or maybe at the very beginning you have slow growth, but there's always a stage where you have rapid growth. And year after year, you can report growth. Hey, we've grown by 10%, we've grown by 15%, we've grown by 50%. Like for us, for example, our vault has doubled, I think, 3 years in a row. Now, anybody who knows mathematics knows that you can't continue doubling year after year after year. And so eventually, because if you just double 10 years in a row, it just becomes astronomically huge. Like it's like 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, and 1,024 times bigger than when you started. So like, that's huge. That's a huge growth. Like doubling over 1 year to the next. Like if you're making $10 the 1 year, and then you make $20 the next year, you can be like, hey, I doubled. And it's like, well, big deal. You only really went up by 10 bucks. But if you double again, like it becomes 40, and it's like, well, not a big deal. Then you double again, and you double again. You only have to do that a few times. In fact, 10 years, and that $10 becomes $10,000. And then the year after that, it becomes 20,000, then 40,000, then 80,000. So you get this, you just can't maintain that type of growth. So when a company, once it kind of has done that rapid growth for a while, it'll hit, it's not always a plateau because you can usually continue to grow because markets grow, there's more people who are born and come into the market, or new technologies or whatever happens to be. But once you're well established, it's hard to maintain growth year after year after year. Games Workshop for the past few years has been doing a lot of restructuring in order to increase their profit margins. Things like shifting from their expensive stores that would have several employees in a mall, which is like premium lease, to their one-man operations that are in a strip mall. So it's much cheaper, and they don't have to make as many sales in order to have for the store to make as much as it did before. And so revenues can go down a bit, but since their profit margin went up so much, there was growth in the business, although it wasn't a growth of number of customers as much as it was a growth of profits. And so this is what they've been doing for the past few years. And so I'm not so much interested in, like, it's interesting to see the revenue and the profit, but it's more looking at what they're doing and then seeing the results of what they're doing. For example, they restructure from the 5-6 man stores to a 1-man store, or they increase their prices by a large margin over a course of just a few years, or they really push their web store. They start making more things direct only, forcing people to buy it right from them, which is a much higher profit margin than if they buy from an independent retailer. Or shutting down web stores in Canada. Now that's a small one, but like years ago they did it to the United States, and they restructure the UK one whenever they can to try to squeeze out the web stores as much as possible because they want to be the only ones selling online. Or, and here's a big one, increasing the number of products that they release. If you've noticed over the past year or two, there's been a rapid increase in the number of codexes and editions of the rules that have come out. Like the 7th edition, if we want to call it that, came out only 2 years after 6th edition, whereas 6th edition came 4 years after 5th, and most of the time it was about a 4 to 5 year span. But this one was only 2 years later that they did this new edition, and now they're doing all sorts of new things. And so you would expect, if you're increasing the number of products that you're releasing and you're rapidly releasing this, that your revenue wouldn't go down, that would be a year where you could actually see revenue go up as you're selling more products. But revenue didn't go up. So that is more a key indicator to me that, you know, if revenue just goes down from one year to the next, not a big deal. It's going to happen. It's going to go down one year and up another year. You're just going to have, there's some randomness to it that you don't really have any control over. Like, and you might say, well, it's competitive stuff, and yes, all those things factor in, but sometimes it's just random. How many people sign up today for the vault as opposed to tomorrow? It'll be partially due to what we post, but it'll just be partially due to who happened to be watching that day, who happened to log on. Like, we can release the best content on a day, but if there's certain people who just didn't even, maybe their internet was down, and so they didn't even look at it, so they couldn't have signed up. Whereas the day after that, they are able to sign up, and then they see it and then they want to sign up. So it's just, there's always a random element to everything. And so a lot of that randomness kind of averages out because you're on a large scale, but it's just you're going to have ups and downs. And so you don't have to be like, oh, their revenue went down, this is the beginning of the end. It's more their revenue went down even though they released a lot more products. And that's indicating something right there. Their profits went down, partially because there was more investments, but also partially because their revenue went down. And their profit margins actually decreased a little bit. They went from like 24% to 29%. Sorry, the other way around, 29% to 24% or something like that. I can't remember what it was. Or that was their cost. I can't remember. Their profit margins had a slight decrease as well when you look at the financial reports. So it's interesting to see. I'm not saying Games Workshop is going out of business. What I am saying is over the past few years, they have definitely lost customers. Because the last time I noticed this happen was over the course of a couple of years, they had done some rapid price increases, which of course everybody was like, oh, they're so expensive. It's like, it's a niche product. They can price it wherever they want as long as people are buying it. So I don't have a problem with that. What is interesting though is they pretty much doubled their prices, but their revenue remained the same. And so for some people, it's like, okay, they're continuing on business as usual, but they're not, because if you double the price of something and make the same amount of money, you sold half as much as what you sold before. Like if you have something that costs $50 and 1 year you sold 100 of them, and so you made $5,000, right? And then the next year you raise the price from $50 to $100, and you make $5,000 again. Hold on. Yeah, if you make $5,000 again, so it's no longer $50, but it's $100, then you've sold 50 of them instead of 100 of them. And so you might say, well, look, the numbers are just as good. In fact, the profit margins are better because we sold less products but got the same amount of money. So yeah, your profit margins are going to look great. Your shareholders are going to be happy of the dividends that you're paying out. But in the end, you lost half your customers. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily, but probably in this market. In other markets, sometimes you want to cut out the fat. You want to cut the customers who cost you more money than they make you. There are some industries where you want to do that. If you're a service industry, for example, let's say you are a web designer or whatever, and you have that one client who comes to you with little stuff, just the $50 jobs, but he's really nitpicky about everything, so it ends up just not making you very much money. And then you have this other client who comes to you and he's like, here's a $50,000 web design job, and he gives you the good outline, and so you're able to get it done at a kind of really efficiently because it's a larger job. Well, you'd rather have more of those large ones, not because they make you more money, because you could make that much money with lots of little clients, but because they are more profitable that way. And so less customers can make you more money. But the problem with that in this industry is that it's kind of cyclical, that if you have less customers, then they have less people to play against. And one of the strengths that 40K and fantasy have always had that other games didn't is that when you wanted to get into miniature wargaming, most likely you'd find that your friends or other people were playing 40K or fantasy, and they weren't really playing anything else. So you might like War Machine or Infinity or something else, but unless you're really willing to put in the effort of recruiting other people, which is a lot of work, I can tell you that, you're just going to be like, okay, I like these games, but I'll play 40K because everybody else plays it, and I'd rather play a game and have players to play against. But if you have less customers, there's less of those people. Like, for example, in this area right here, this is only anecdotal, this is not like this, the rest of the world is like this, but around here, it's easier to find War Machine players than it is to find 40K players. That wasn't true 5 years ago. 5 years ago, it was the opposite. It was hard to find War Machine players and easy to find 40K players. And so if that's a result of having less customers. Now, why there's less customers is a whole other subject, and I'm not even going to bother trying to get into that. All I'm saying is that if you raise your prices and your revenues remain the same, you've lost customers. Your profit margins go up, and it looks good, but in the long term, that's going to hurt a business like Games Workshop because they rely on getting into those niches as much as possible. And if you lose your people, you're all of a sudden not able to find those other people who would sign up, who would become customers and make you even more money. So that's a bad thing. So on top of that, now we have this year where they've released even more products, and yet their revenues didn't just stay the same, they actually went down. And so once again, I'm not saying they're going out of business. I'm just saying that their market share is decreasing, and that is very apparent. And it's going to continue to decrease. And now the second question of Tom Kirby stepping down, I don't really have any personal quarrels, or I neither like nor dislike Tom Kirby. That's what I'm going to say right now. I don't really know him at all. I read the preamble, but reading like one cover or one letter from him or other stuff from him is not necessarily going to give you a full detail of his character and how he works in the company. It was interesting. He's very casual. He said some weird things in it, like, we had a good year if you don't look at the numbers, is basically what he said. He also said, we don't do any market analysis or research, and we don't need to. That's kind of a scary thing to say. Your shareholders who don't know your market necessarily, who are just shareholders, are going to look at that and be like, you don't do market research? You just release products willy-nilly? And you just think, well, these are awesome products. We know that, and so their market's going to love them. And you're not going to do it. You know, I don't necessarily think that he needs to do market research, but pointing it out in your preamble, when your financial report already looks bad, maybe not the best idea. Just putting that out there. And there's a few other little things in there as well that just it comes across as a little too casual for somebody who's announcing that they're down 42% in their profits. They're still profitable though, so there's still money that was made. They weren't in negative profits, so it's you know, they're not dying. They're not going to die. They're too big a company now. If they did do worse and worse, and eventually they're either going to get bought out by another company who will be able to restructure, or there will be major changes. Like, who knows? So Tom Kirby announces that he's stepping down as of January 1st, and he puts in some interesting things about how another CEO will be chosen, which is also interesting because I'm not sure if he was serious in there, because it was kind of weird. He's like, write a letter. We don't care about your resume. Write us a letter and we'll do interviews, and then we're going to choose a CEO. I don't know if he was being serious about that, or if it was more just him being a little, you know, joking around about, you know, casually choosing a new CEO kind of thing. So he's stepping down. What do I think about that? I think it'll be interesting. I'm kind of, in a way, excited that there's going to be a change, and hoping that a new CEO will see things differently and do things differently, because there's a few things that I really think Games Workshop could improve on. Product-wise, they're great. I love their products. You can complain about rules, you can complain about stuff, but in all, they do a really good job with their products. But things like, just a lot of things like social media, they seem to have a hard time with. They just started using YouTube, but they still have comments disabled. And that's kind of a big deal, especially when they also deleted their main Facebook page when they started getting negative stuff on it. Like, that's not how you deal with social media. Social media is the way things are now. I'm not saying it's going to be their primary source of income, because they obviously have built a big business on the backbone of a lot of retail stores and independent retailers and all of that. So that is, you know, and trade shows and all that kind of stuff. That's the way that you could build it. But online has increased a lot over the past 10 years, and they can't just ignore that. And they haven't totally. They've started posting really good videos on YouTube. They started using Facebook for all their stores. They updated their web store, you know, whether you like it or not, they updated it. You know, people are always going to have opinions on what's good and bad web design, I can tell you that. And most people don't have any idea what they're talking about, because it's actually still in its infancy. It's only about 20 years old at most. And so a lot of people are still trying to figure out what is good web design. And as soon as we figure out something, there's a big disruption. Like all of a sudden, iPhones and iPads and tablets and smartphones come into the market and totally change the way you have to even think about web design. And so it's not that people are dumb and don't know what they're talking about. It's more that it's just so early that what is a good website is a big question. So let's review what I think about this. Games Workshop financials, not looking very good, especially when you consider the things that they've been doing over the past few years. Tom Kirby stepping down. I'm happy for that, because I just want to see more of a change than just, and I don't disagree with all his restructuring or making the stores one-man stores. I don't disagree with that. I don't agree with it either. I don't really know much about it to really be able to comment. Restructuring, getting rid of all their middle management and consolidating that, was that something they should do? I don't know. They think so. So maybe it was a good choice. All I know is that they've increased the amount of products they're putting out. They've increased their prices over the past few years, and their revenues aren't any better for it. In fact, this year they're a little worse. And that is where it shows a little troubling signs there. And then on top of that, Tom Kirby announcing this, he's stepping down. And when you actually look at his personal income, it actually went up this year, like almost doubled. Even though the financial report is worse, his income doubled, which I thought was interesting. Maybe I'm missing something in there, but that doesn't really matter, because it's only still a small portion. It was only like by like £500,000, something ridiculous like that. So anyways, so that's my thoughts. So we're going to end FAQ here.